Okay, hello everyone, good afternoon. It is great to be back again to the 8th symposium. We just came back from a wonderful walk on the riverbank, and it was really nice just to see the sights, get in touch, in tune with the land and with our fellow colleagues. Just as yesterday, today has been a wonderful day. Many very, very compelling panels. In the morning, we did some indigenous language revitalization. So a community of practice shared all sorts of interesting, amazing things that are going on in Australia. Then we had some higher music education and social change, different approaches, and another amazing panel connecting singing, well-being, as well as thinking about different ways that we interact with music and with each other. And right now, we are ready for the social impact of music making in Oceania theme, session number 2. Moving on to Sarah Williams, Born to Stand Out, the role of hip-hop for young South Sudanese Australians in building their political voice to resist racializing discourses. Sorry.
Salam, shalom, kia ora, hola. My name's Sarah, and I live, work and play on Bunurong and Boonwurrung lands in Melbourne. And this first image is my acknowledgement of country by artist Lowy on Wadawurrung country, also known as Geelong area. And I put this image as an acknowledgement of country because one of my friends, Mark Yedeka-Paulsen, speaks about intercultural spaces using imagery such as the coastline and as the space in between. And we've just come from a walk from the river, also a space in between where we come across cultures and across difference. And I think that's fitting for this talk on alternative forms of artivism. We've actually got my larger presentation. I did cut it down, so this does represent his intercultural framework, so I'm just going to skip over this, but definitely check out Mark later on. So I identify as a pracademic. I came from a youth work community development background, almost 2 decades, OG youth worker, and done a lot of experimental work in that space across cultures and with communities. But I just wanted to share my personal motivation or my positionality of this particular presentation, as it's always quite a difficult time in terms of speaking about racialising discourses. With my PhD thesis in the opening acknowledgements, I shared that across the last decade I've been to almost 10 different funerals of people of Black African descent in the lands we now call Australia. In fact, last year in September I attended 3 funerals, and next weekend there's another funeral. And so a lot of you may know, or within your work, that the personal is professional and vice versa, but it's also political. And so I just wanted to share my positionality in terms of framing racialising discourses today. So I've titled this, or again retitled it, Art as Activism, because the broader question that you saw in the abstract was my full PhD thesis. And today I'm just going to share a few alternative types of artivism that I identified through hip-hop and conscious hip-hop for young people of African descent, mostly South Sudanese young people. And it's funny just seeing them in large, big screen. These are my friends, my community, and I wish they were here with me. So I kind of feel their presence as we're sharing some of these stories. So in 2007, in the lands we now call Australia, there was a young gentleman, Liep Goyen, who was murdered in Noble Park. It's my hood, it's a place near me in Dandenong in Victoria, And you might have remembered that in the in national media, there was allegations that South Sudanese young people weren't integrating into Australian society, and in fact that a Sudanese gang had killed him. And it was later found that it was two Caucasian people who had killed him, and we've never really heard about that in the national media. That sent a narrative over a decade long of media and moral panics targeting these communities. But my master's thesis was looking at the concept of social inclusion, and would it be possible in the next 10 years to ever feel like we fit in Australia? And through that master's thesis found that that was the wrong concept or language to be using of social inclusion. The rubric of social inclusion wasn't fitting the narratives from communities. So we collectively came up with this concept of want to stand out through kind of an iterative process, I guess, through action research. And you can see some of the imagery here. I'm too fabulous to fit in, rather than you know, having this concept of integrating into Australian society. So I'm going to play 2 videos. This first one's an embedded YouTube video, so hopefully it works. And this is just some imagery of my methodology.
The society here expects a black male or black female to act a certain way. You almost have to like make yourself small.
Born to stand out, the role of hip-hop for South Sudanese Australian youth to develop their voice to resist white cultural discourse. Media and moral panics targeted at this community over the last decade have limited their sense of freedom and well-being. My research sought to understand how they negotiate life in Australia despite this. Through hip-hop, the current generation of young people developed innovative ways to display agency, expression, and strong counter-narratives. This links back to a long history of arts-based civil rights activism, which represents black excellence as expressed in the idea of being born to stand out rather than trying to be honorary whites.
Hip-hop for me gave me a purpose. I related to it because I saw people just like myself being able to express themselves.
Awesome, we'll just click on to the next slide. And I see the gentleman in front of me has some shoes on with a hashtag on them. And so in terms of alternative forms of artivism, we often have traditional views of what activism is, and many in this space would be familiar with the concept of artivism. But the communities of African descent reclaimed the African Gangs hashtag and started uploading images of themselves graduating and going to dinners in Melbourne and saying, look at us, are we integrating? And it started a dialogue across the nation to reclaim those narratives. So as the next slides come up, as you can see, this is the broader research question. And specifically what I'm looking at through hip-hop is the building of political voice. Everyone here has a voice. It's not that we're giving voice or empowering voice, but building that political voice to resist racialising discourses. Oh. Yeah. So I'm not going to go through critical race theory too much. The main theoretical framework I'm going to look at is new social movement theory, but it is important to frame racialising discourses within the idea of critical race theories, I should say, and specifically the idea that race is a social construct. It doesn't exist, but it is existent and we use it every day. And part of critical race theory is the idea that we like to group people into categories, and specifically the categories we were noticing in media and moral panics was this idea of mobs, criminals, gangs being used with migration attributes of refugees and associating moral qualities to young people, resulting in, you know, my friends not being able to, people crossing the road, people not associating with them, and limited freedom and well-being, which we're going to talk about. So for those of you who do like to understand the theoretical framework, new social movement theory specifically was looking at identity-based social movements. And specifically, we know that there were many class-based social movements before the 1970s, and now, even though there were civil rights movements before then, identity-based movements, such as what I've classified as hip-hop, being a new social movement. So does anyone listen to hip-hop in the audience? Oh, surprisingly, yes. I've been to some talks where no one has. And I'm particularly interested in what type of hip-hop you listen to, and maybe that's where you start to phase over. But I'm specifically talking about conscious hip-hop or political hip-hop. And you'll see some of my friends noted here. So I don't have time to play this video, but I'm just going to share briefly just some of the outcomes of action research and the alternative forms of artivism. So I mentioned my friends, these are Liep's family and some young people who are reclaiming limited freedom and well-being, and gathered on the steps of Parliament when it was Liep's memorial, and using some of the images of T-shirts and their identities to be activists together. So specifically, I was looking at some of the emerging political tracks that they were using, and you'll see some different titles here. So if you've got a pen or you want to listen to some of these tracks, I highly recommend it. Specifically, Crown's track, Let Us Live, where you can see his imagery of holding a South Sudanese flag going down an escalator. So through that, we identified that protest was one form of alternative form of artivism. Over the last decade, part of that was gathering on the streets, and moving to that, there was a form of dissent. So if anyone's heard of trap hip hop, it's another form. If you have Netflix, you can go to a documentary called 1-4, which is a Western Sydney hip hop group, and you'll hear about trap hip hop. So the third, and I'm wrapping up now, thank you, was consciousness raising and going on a journey from a process of camps to festivals and events and public performances to express political voice. But what I found was I was actually surprised. I thought that young people would use the political tracks at the public events, and instead what they ended up doing, sorry, I did give my new slides that I'd cut these up, it's all good, was they were using ideas of black excellence and black power in their tracks to express their political voice in a different way. So that was a surprising kind of outcome. So the counter-narratives then brought in different other cultural communities to feel a part of that consciousness-raising journey. So that's a development theorist, Dutta, who has the culture-centred approach, which was sort of the surprising outcome. And not so surprising to some of you, I'm sure. So just finishing up, that these were sites of resistance, and I just kind of wanted to leave, I guess, with a provocation in terms of wrapping in the concept of born to stand out. That freedom feminology, Thomas Sankara renamed Burkina Faso, and it kind of translates towards standing upright, that communities through self-determination using their political voice can experience some of these phenomenon, I guess, and I'll leave it there as an open-ended question.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And now our final presentation for this panel, Sasha Block will be talking about hidden musicians, music's role in well-being and negotiations of belonging for newly arrived migrants in regional Australia.
Okay, oh, this is me, yes. Hello to everybody again. Great, I'm just attending one day. Unfortunately, I can't make more. Great atmosphere, great communication. I haven't felt that engaged in the audience, probably never in my little short academic life, so thanks for that. This research, I just wanted to say several words about myself. This research draws upon my PhD research, which was about migrant music in regional Australia. And I was asking the only probably question, why music matters, why we need to think about regional migration, which is supposed to be purely migration strategies related to economy, regional development. Why do we need to think about the arts in that? One of the chapters, so I looked at various forms of music making, which can be formal, informal, which can be in the house, which can be hip-hop music making in home, it can be in the church, everywhere. I looked at the practices of migrant music regardless of the migrant race. What was important for me is to look at the non-Western migrants, so-called visible migrants, that definitely are different visibly because of their appearance. So I wanted to understand what difference does it make for them in terms of living, in terms of sense of belonging and finding regional Australia as their home. Yeah. This way. That way. Yay. Thank you. So first of all, let's just cover the context, let's say. Why do we need to think about regional, particularly places? What is so special about that? So just several bullet points for you. As you well known probably, that our migration policies, our migration strategies, they're all urban centers, and it happened just historically because the epicenter of migrations, not just in Australia, but in Australia in particular, were always linked to urban development, to economic development, and therefore urban places accommodated these capabilities, infrastructures, competences on fostering international migrants and particularly non-Western migrants. The regional places have less competence in dealing with non-Western migrants. They have probably less infrastructure, they have less experience in that. However, our migration policies, I'm talking about the Australian migration policies, because they're urban-centered, they traditionally neglect the fact that urban areas requires more support, they require more probably competency and infrastructure to actually to have this regional migration. And therefore, we have this strange situation that Australia, in one hand, welcomes a migrant in regional places. We screaming for labor force shortages, but at the same time, we struggle to understand that there should be specific requirements in terms of accommodating regional migrants, not in terms of the physical infrastructure, like we need housing. We always talk about housing, which is a huge issue. We talk about language courses, for example. We talk about employment, but cultural component is always missing in these conversations. And if you see the current migration strategy submission, it's a huge emphasis is put on labor shortages, and nobody talks about accommodating cultural differences, assuming that we just need to join the others in the pub or in the church, and if you practice something different, there is no understanding that we need to accommodate this difference as well. So yes, it's a double issue. It's a regional migration, but at the same time, cultural component with within this regional migration. Again, very quickly, just keeping through the theoretical lens, and I'm pretty sure you know that, but I just wanted to reiterate some points that why do we need to study music in relation to migration, in relation to settlement? Because music actually helps people to recreate their identity and find the connection with the place. And there is a concept of DIY identity that assumes that we are not simply unpacking our heritage, unpacking our cultural practices, we're reinventing them, we're reassembling them, we're rethinking them depending on the new social and cultural settings. This is what I think Sarah talked about, that music, it is a practice of negotiation of cultural citizenship. If there is no available avenues for practicing social citizenship or participating in civil society, music becomes this informal avenue for expressing and claiming your right to be in the place. So yes, and the first thing that I'm really particularly was interested in, the everyday, the mundane practice of music. Music that's been practiced in everyday places, not necessarily conservatoriums or halls, but probably markets or pubs or any sort of formal and informal places that re-establish local cultural and social identities. Yes, and another very short preface again. So this research took place in 4 regional areas, and they're not exactly remote, as you can see. So it's Wagga Wagga and Coffs Harbour in New South Wales, so it's blue dots, not red dots. And Cairns and Toowoomba in Queensland. So I particularly chose hinterland places and coast cities, and they are not exactly small. I was trying to find places with some sort of visible migrant presence, because in some places the communities are so scattered that you can't possibly see them from the outside. So, and as you can see, the migrant population collectively constitutes like 3% from the overall population. So we talk about very small numbers. And yes, I talked to various refugees communities, but I didn't put, probably it's been erased, skilled migrants were also a point of my interest, because skilled migration is a huge emphasis, again, from governmental perspective, that we need skilled migrants. So how they're dealing with cultural belonging is also been at my focus. And now to the findings. What I have found. I found that the most of the migrant musicians interviewed had established their music practices in the first year of their arrival. I explored the abundance of music practices which are everyday life and routine associated with a sense of normality and order. Music as an integral element of daily functioning amongst work and house duties, family time, extended family gatherings, and everyday leisure time is something that can be seen as a distinctive role of music in many migrant home cultures. In other words, music is not something special. It's not some professional special skill you need to be taught in a specific place. It's something everydayness that's practicing as a working routine and leisure routine. For many, music making becomes an inheritance from refugee camps mechanism and skill of mental adaptation and search for feeling of community. For those of refugee backgrounds, displacement may represent a long-lasting mental health issue and triggers to create coping strategies. According to multiple interviews of people from Rwanda, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Liberia, together with sport and attending churches services, collective music making in refugee camps is one of the available instruments of positive reinforcement and collective action through this feeling of hope could be experienced collectively. So what's happening? They bring this practice from refugee camps into the new place, because they face the same challenge. They need to rearrange their entire life, and they need to manage this chaos. So music becomes this coping mechanism. Ooh. Yeah, you can enjoy the quotes, which probably speaks better and loudly than analytical extractions. Music definitely plays the role in remembering and forgetting functions, and this is what I was talking about, do-it-yourself identity. People actually reflect on their past and their future, and in this way they reinvent it, and they do it individually and collectively in the party. For some communities, and I'm emphasizing refugees again, the recreation of collective identity is a very difficult task, because these communities cannot grow naturally, because the way they came to Australia, it's not something that you can grow naturally and organically as skilled migrants. So for them, this re-establishment and collective action through music becomes extremely important. So just jumping and skipping, what I have found that family parties or men gatherings in a garage on the weekend become a practice of communal and cultural solidarity, and at the same time an expression of cultural identity which otherwise cannot be practiced in shared public places. So it is important that not only what is practiced and how it's practiced, but where it's practiced. And what have I found? That there is a sharp contrast between public spaces and private places, because sometimes people, they can't, for example, afford to rent a community hall, or they don't know if they're allowed to do that, or they wouldn't go to the other public places because they feel intimidated. For example, they won't go to the pub. Some musicians won't go to the pub because they feel not professional enough. So these home parties, the entire life of music making is happening somewhere behind the scenes, behind the public eye. And therefore, we're dealing with the abundant music scene, which is hidden. And this is where the cultural pedagogy takes place, music classes and dance classes, family teaches their children some, music and dance routine, and this is what's happening within houses. Just the last thing that I wanted to draw the attention, and probably this is exactly the point I want to share with you, and this is what constitutes the question, so what? We know that music is important, so what? The point is that so far, the art policies and cultural policies, they live separately from migration policies, and this is this is the reason why we're having what we're having. Migration policies do not recognize that cultural components of inclusion and belonging actually necessary to put emphasis on, and therefore we do not have particularly migrant-targeted regional cultural policies. We all recognize as having equal access to anything, but migrants have significant handicap in practices music, or they probably practice another type of music that are not introduced in regional conservatoriums, for example, or schools, and therefore this exclusion is happening on this arts expression. So what we can actually gain from this? So if we could have these integrated policies, and we talked about the ecosystem approach, that's probably the cultural policies can be seen as a key ingredient of regional settlement policies. Their art space can be a platform for addressing the issues of health and well-being, as well as social cohesion and multicultural recognition by the majority. If facilitated, hidden musicians and music making at home have an opportunity to intensify intercultural communication with regional communities and provide spaces for belonging for diverse cultural identities settling in regional areas. With all great outcomes like enrichment of regional music scene, migrant sustainable settlement, which is a major challenge for the federal government, and of course the inclusive communities. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for all these wonderful and engaging presentations. We will go to the people online in a few minutes, so for you to feel part of what is going on, feel free to turn on your camera. If you have any question, you can ask. But right now, I would like to start with the first question for Julie and Eve. Can you tell us a little bit more about your participants and about the music making that was going on? You talked about poetic inquiry. So when the participants come up with the lyrics, how do you translate that into songs? Because we have different styles. So tell us a bit more about that.
So we worked with 3 First Nations musicians. One of the important things to note about our project was that as to white women, we did not think it was appropriate for us to be doing the lead facilitation for a group of Indigenous youth. We wanted it to be all of that work and that dialogue happening from and within the community itself. So we employed youth workers who knew the youth participants and had long-standing relationships with them. And we also employed leaders, musicians, songmakers, elders in the community who also had relationships with the area and the youth participants to do that work of shaping the songs. So there were 3 musicians, some people in the room will know, a young emerging artist called Nene, who does incredible R&B style performance mixed with touches of hip hop. Jungaji, who is a traditional songman, who's been around Brisbane and other parts of Australia as a leading musician for decades. And you might know him by his artist name Kitsch, but Taitunga, who is a Samoan high cultural talking chief and very significant public figure in the local Pacifica community. And they all bring very different kinds of practice, singer-songwriter guitar, R&B kind of vocal driven, and beatboxing and hip-hop kind of production. So that was all in the mix, and the young participants were able to work with whoever they wanted, dip in and out, and ended up that everyone worked with everybody. But it was very much, there was part of this process was that it was people who were known, who were part of the community, who were seen as being really kind of respected by the participants, and they were excited to work with them. And in fact, one of the participants, when we had our first session, we were sharing who their favourite artists were. They were like, oh, I'm actually really embarrassed to say it because my favourite artist is Nene, and he was sitting across the room from them.
So we were invited into the space. They really wanted to, so the participants really wanted to make some music. None of them were doing music at school. None of them had done music really. One of them, they all loved music, and so they were invited to come along. They knew that they were participants in the space on a regular basis, but not necessarily in relation to music. And so that's how it started. And we were invited because they really wanted to write some songs. And so then we, together with all the facilitators, helped them to do what they wanted. What we didn't say is that, so you would have heard the 3 different songs were extremely different in style, and that's because that's what they wanted to do. And there were some other participants who started out by doing the poetic inquiry and then changed what they wanted to do, and that was fine. So we had one participant, and it was in the video, who was using the poetic inquiry, and then she started in her interview, she was talking about what it felt like to be in love, and that became a love song. So it was just a love song. It wasn't anything about flourishing at all, but it was fantastic, and she was doing some, she was improvising with her own words about what that was, and that's where it started, and then it went where it went, and that will still be on the app. It will still be up for anyone to hear.
Okay, thank you so much. Ryan, is there anything online? Are some people there asking questions? Okay, so let's move on to the room. Yes.
Yeah, I should stay here for Bridie. Hi, people online now that I have a microphone. Just a general question about, I guess, relevant to the conscious hip-hop as well as the songwriting and hip-hop exchanges. Did you feel that your presence in the room and doing the research project was a limit on their creativity as well? And did you feel that the students were holding back, I guess, expressions of like trying to edify, just in general, in both the spaces in Sudanese conscious hip-hop and then in that community young people conversation to tell the researchers what they want to hear or see the difference? Is that something at all that you felt at any stage?
I'm giving it a go. That's a really great question. So I guess in my broader concept of my being and positionality, looking at decolonising research approaches, and one of those is, I guess, a relational approach. And so, interestingly enough, many communities are over-researched, but South Sudanese also are with some of these topics. And a lot of the time, deficit narratives are kind of projected onto them around, you know, criminality and gangs, and what does it feel like to be racialised in Australia. And so because of, I guess, decades-long relationship, it felt quite organic to be doing this together. And this is a very tough kind of thing to nut out, so feel free to chat to me afterwards. But a lot of my friendship groups are people of BIPOC backgrounds, Black, Indigenous, people of colour, and in terms of my intercultural identity, that's Blackness concepts are embedded in my framework, if that makes sense. I'm still articulating this because I think it's like something that we haven't really talked about or published or that kind of thing. So in answer to your question, when I'm there, I'm kind of like cis, or I'm almost South Sudanese to that extent, through relationship, and not just invite, but like through their own articulations of my relationship. But what I think is important as a youth worker, some people often suggest, like, why can't everyone be there? And it's important to have spaces that are just predetermined for people to work on their political voice and really just have, I don't like the word safe spaces, I think that's overused. We can never make it safe, basically. But through the relationship, there are facilitators who are facilitating. So I'm there as part of the relationship, but I'm not dictating the room or anything like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's very much the approach that we took to, you know, one of the most important things about being with a community is being with a community and taking time and working on whatever time frame feels right for the community, for the project. One thing that came up during our work was that there was sorry business, and we just paused the workshops and came back after people had had some time. And was what was needed, and that's just, and it, yes, it doesn't, that sort of thing doesn't fit within a kind of necessarily capitalist-driven research mandate, but at the same time, if you're going to do work that is genuinely about being with and representing community, it has to take however long it takes with whoever needs to be in the room. And that was very much an important part of our process. And that's why Julie and I weren't leading processes. We made sure that the research paid people from within the community to do the work with community. And I think that was really important.
And to answer your question directly, Tom, we didn't ask them the questions. So, so we weren't even doing that. At the end, we had conversations, actually led by, in that case, it was I think it was led by Tai Tunga, who led the conversations about what they felt they'd got out of it. But in the end, as I said, they took what they wanted to take. They came if they wanted to come. They were, they didn't come if they didn't want to come, and that's how it worked out for us. And that's why we didn't tell you what we thought they were saying in their songs, because I think that when you're trying to do ethical research, it's really difficult to really try to be truly ethical in what you're doing and in your representation of other people's words. And I think that's a little bit problematic in quite a bit of research that's out there, where we are always called upon to interpret what other people are saying and what other people are thinking and what it means to them and how it benefits them. And I think that that's what we were trying to do here, is that we were trying to do research that actually might, if it does, we didn't know, if you think it did with their songs, that they were able to try and find out what works for them, how they flourish, where the flourishing stories are in their lives, and that they might be able to make some music about it at the same time. And it was just as simple as that for us.
Would you like to add something?
Well, I could add something into on the regional migrant hip hop, in contrast to what you are saying, that it's a very proactive resistance. It's a claiming my space. So in regional areas, and there are, you arguably even cannot find, identify them as a scene. So it's a bunch of just young migrant people from various national backgrounds. It's just a cohort of people. So they're creating this music at home. And I think the theme that unites them, and I've talked to people in Wagga and in Cairns. In Cairns is a particularly interesting scene that's also related to indigenous hip hop scene in Cairns. So what I'm trying to say that their theme is just I'm exist. It's not. This is. I actually want to have some little nominal space to exist, and this scene is incredibly thin, and they inevitably migrate either to Sydney or they just start working at the existing professions, and just it's all just disappears. But yes, there are little and incredibly interesting migrant hip hop scenes in regional places.
Okay, so thank you very much for all our presenters in this afternoon.